Today I'll speak on American poetry, on students' demand. Students have been demanding that I should speak on American poetry and especially the trends in American poetry. So today I am going to speak on trends in American poetry. The post-war period, dating from 1950s, 60s and early 70s, makes a transition in the mood and taste of American poetry. The new American poetry is open-minded, spontaneous, personal, antagonistic to form, rebellious, and in the words of David Perkins, intellectually skeptical, yet morally concerned. This study is not concerned with the history of making of poems, but rather the poems which have made history in modern and postmodern times. The achievement of new American poetry is a good measure of the achievement of American culture as a whole. Confessional School. I'll begin with the start of Confessional School of Poetry in American literature. Confessional poetry is singled out for its private and taboo subjects, the plumbing of the psyche as a quest for the lost identity and its attempt to relieve the past with its agonies and humiliations. The focus of confessional poem is on the distinctly ugly, unseemly and humiliating aspects. There is a brutal, frank revelation of the world of faded gentility, of failure and defect. Besides, other great poets of this genre are Sylvia Plath, Theodore Roethke, Annie Sexton, Snodgrass and John Berryman. The poetry of this school provides a good example of Pont's imagism, whatticism, and William Carlos Williams' objectivism. William Carlos Williams' poetry belonged to the school of objectivism. While studying at the University of Pennsylvania Medical School, he became a friend of Pont and shared his subscriptions to the tenets of imagism. The limited nature of imagism was extended in Al-Ko Quartet, the prose poems of Cora in Hell, and Spring and All, to expressionism characterized by a clean stripping of poetry to essentials, by holding of emotion at arm's length, and by vivid observations restricted almost entirely to sensory experience. William Carlos Williams started the movement of objectivism in American poetry, school of poets influenced by William Carlos Williams that came to prominence in 1930. It sees poetry as a process whose form begins with the object dealt with and moves by improvisation, thought-verbal associations inspired by the initial object. Leading objectivist poets are George Oppen, Charles Reznikoff, and Louis Jakobsky. Objectivism was the name given by Ayn Rand to her theories. Imagism flourished in England and the United States from 1909 to 1917. The credo expressed in same imagist poets included the use of the language of common period, precision, the creation of new rhythm, absolute freedom in choice of subject matter, the evocation of images in hard, clear poetry, and concentration originating in the aesthetic philosophy of T.E., whom the movement soon attracted Ezra Pound, who became the leader of this movement, opposed to the romantic conception of poetry and inspired by Greek and Roman classics and by Chinese, Japanese, and modern French poets. Expressionism, aesthetic movement in which artist expresses inner experience through the free representation of objective facts. It emphasizes on the creator's mood and attitude. This movement is a development of Impressionism, Expressionism, which is exemplified in literature by T.S. Eliot to a great length and great extent. George Oppen, a protege of Ezra Pound, is another important poet of this genre. His terse poems appear in Being Numerous. It is a long poem divided into 5 books published in 1946, 48, 49, 51 and 58. Fragments of the incomplete book 6 were published posthumously in 1963 as an appendix to the collection of the first 5 poems. Written in the variable root of Williams' free verse, the work incorporates prose passages from historical documents, newspaper accounts, geological surveys, and personal letters, ranging from one by one anonymous semi-literate black men to those by Edward de Halberg, Allen Ginsberg, and Ezra Pound, all reinforcing the poem's themes. Now I'll talk on countercurrent. This is another movement. The extremism in New American poetry was the result of buoyancy of the American spirit after the war. Americans had the feeling of stepping into British shoes and of a new awareness of the authority and influence wielded by their nation in world affairs. The New American poetry is in sharp contrast to the diffident, modest, and exhausted tone of British poetry after the war. Thus, the more angry, the deep imagist poet Robert Bly gets with American involvement in Vietnam, the more indigenous the beat poet Ginsberg gets with the failure of America, the more they see of themselves. Indeed, the exuberance of America is reflected in the exuberance of new poetry. The 1960s and early 1970s were energetic years producing poetry of the underground, the basic style of denial, of self immersed along with theme of doubt, imitable human violation and mundane passion. Now emerges Beat School. The guru of the beatnik school is Ginsberg. He is the more maligned poet in the history of American poetry for his frank and brutal assault on the established norms. Ginsberg contrasts Whitman's American dream with the reality of American present. Although it is impossible to draw the line between the beat and international counterculture influences, including the Beatles, Rolling Stones, and Leonard Cohen. The publication of Damn You and Ezra went hand in hand with a strong awareness of what was happening in American culture at that time. Ginsberg's Howl is a thought-provoking and entirely a new concept of poetry writing. In 1960, the poetry of Whitman, Williams, and Ginsberg were being discovered by the Commonwealth. Ginsberg is entirely different in thought perception than the rest. His poems belongs to alternate American traditions, radical set of cultural attitudes and ideas towards what constitutes a poem. The beat movement was spread by such American publications like Evergreen Review and the City Lights book. Lawrence Ferlinghetti and Corso are the other important poets of this genre. Now appears a new movement called Poetry of Violence. Violence committed in the grip of a strong sentiment or ideological belief forms the nucleus of this school of poetry. Diana Bukowski is the pioneer of violence school of poetry. Bukowski's poems react violently to certain situations. I shoot you each time in that wide dumb back. I shoot you each time in that wide dumb back. Insensitive to me. Glad for the mild recoil of the gun. Glad for the mild recoil of the gun. That relieves a little of my repressed anger. Each time I discharge a bullet at you. Each time I discharge a bullet at you. Love letter postmarked Van Beethoven. Love letter postmarked Van Beethoven. Her personal lament is extended to encompass wider field so that her poems also has different dimensions on human relationships. Bukowski's poems are not only full of love and longing, but also contain sensuous description of sunshine, flowers, diamonds and rubies. There are references to man's landing on the moon, to the Buddha, to black magic and witchcraft. Diana Bukowski's poetry is like a volcano that erupts fire from time to time, unleashing fury, passion and hate through recurring images and violence. Along with Bukowski, two other poets, Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes, are also major poets of their schools. All these poets express conflicting and sexually violent emotions. This kind of violence associated with power enters most human relationships and one has to cope with it, absorb it, or transcend while interacting with the world. The salient in Bukowski's poems of betrayal is a man who has power to love, conquer, hurt, and finally betray. The victim is the poet herself, who writes in the first person, speaks about inhibitions, about the bruises and scars. Then the persona no longer remains trampled down. She rises like a fury to wreak vengeance on her oppressor. Symbols of panther, the hawk, and the jaguar are used by Sylvia Plath. Bukowski and Hughes, in a different manner. Sylvia Plath depicts death as a panther stalking its victim slowly, In Bukowski's vision, however, it is a perversion of love that tracks a woman down with the same inexorable uncertainty. It was not until I met you. It was not until I met you, whose boldness lifted me as a hawk would a snake before he flings it down on the ground to bash the life of its. When rising in revolt to wreak vengeance on men, Bukowski sounds very much like Sylvia Plath. In Daddy and in Lady Lazarus, Sylvia Plath's woman is vengeful fury who cannot be cowed down. I eat men like air, and Daddy is a ritual enacted by a woman to kill the master who holds her in thrall. Similarly, Bukowski's, like Plath's persona, is Daddy ritually destroys the memory of her oppressor. In her poem, Grave of a Son of a Bitch, furiously she writes, I will dance, dance and dance on your grave. I will dance, dance and dance on your grave. Grave, grave, because you are a son of a bitch, a son of a bitch. The New American Poetry celebrate the object which is real, individual and qualitative infinite. Carl Shapiro, an American critic, believes science pursues demonstrable knowledge and calls itself the love of natural love. Religion pursues goodness and calls itself the love of God, and poetry pursues human's knowledge and calls itself love of beauty. True poetry springs from the love of personal truth. He is of the opinion that true poets are the poets of cosmic consciousness. The New American Poetry is poetry of anti-romantic conservatism. Even though the force of the anti-romanticism is itself heavily charged with romantic poetics, the strength of the new poets has roots in tradition. The new poetry is rooted in doubt, immutable human violation, and mundane passion. The symptom of the new mood expressed itself in the new attitude to form in poetry in the mild 70s. The New American Poetry works on the assumption that images released from the unconscious thought, a process of free association, provide stability to poetry. But there is one cannot arrange these images strongly. Poetry will sink into obscurity and lose its relevance to the ordinary readers. The poetics of ordinariness seems to be the motto of New American Poetry. The New American Poetry is poetry of truth and reality. It is the poetry of expanding consciousness. The New American Poetry is the poetry of the real, a product of post-Vietnam and post-Watergate relapse into conservatism. So now we come to the end of this lecture on American poetry. What we find in American poetry, there is a lot of differences between the British poetry and American poetry. British poetry we find is a bit traditional, and American poetry is not that traditional, but rather they fight with the tradition and fight with the old values of life. As for example, when there was war in Vietnam, you see that a lot of poets, they objected to American policies in Vietnam, like Ginsberg and Lawrence Ferlinghetti. Likewise, you find that Sylvia Plath is very bold as far as her love is concerned, and her poem called Daddy is very popular in modern times. And so we see that there is a sea change. And if you compare British poetry with American poetry, you will find a sea change. Like they are very straight. American poetry is very straight, very clear. And though they write love poems, but they are not that type of romanticists, but they are realists compared to the British poetry. So if you have any doubt or any question, you can always contact me, and I'm there to help you. Thank you.